Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. The final college football playoff rankings are here, and I think more importantly, the official 12-team college football playoff bracket. A lot of pissed off fans, and Dill, quite frankly, rightfully so. I thought Reese Davis crushed it. There was a lot of just rambling on for the last 30 minutes of what I just watched. Reese Davis, my guy, I thought said it perfectly. Like there was really no right decision to be made. I think a lot of different teams can point to certain things that can make an argument to get into the college football playoffs. My biggest frustration is a couple of different things. One, it just seems like there's a little bit of a lack of consistency year to year, but also week to week in terms of how we're evaluating these teams. Sometimes it's head to head. Sometimes it's strength of schedule. Sometimes it's just a flat out eyeball test. Sometimes we're valuing wins. Sometimes we're valuing losses. And it changes year to year. It changes week to week. If there was to be a little bit more clear way of evaluating teams, I probably would appreciate it. I think secondly, and Dill, nobody really talks about this, and it's crazy. Like you look at the people making these decisions, like half of them having ties to specific schools. And I'm like a Michigan guy. Ward Manuel's like sitting on the chair here. To me, that's wild. And I'm surprised that's not talked about a little bit more in terms of how we go about selecting these playoffs. Two takes I'll get off my chest. One, I would have likened this, and it's not necessarily that I'm banging the table for them to get into the playoffs, but South Carolina was so hot at the end of the season. Like, just as a college football fan, I would have liked to see them get a chance. And then you look at Miami, I just would have liked to see Cam Ward of that offense playing the college football playoffs. And again, I'm not, banging the table that they should be in over an SMU or over an Alabama. It's more just those were some teams that were really fun to watch down the stretch. Let it fly in the comment section. A lot of different takes to be had. We appreciate you guys. A lot of y'all have been rocking with the boys for the last 4 months as we've broken down these rankings. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I feel like you've given your piece as well on these college football playoff rankings. So I think what I want to do now is just, let's preview the bracket. Dill, what I'll ask you here is, what team do you think has the best pathway for a college football championship here?
I mean, honestly, probably Texas. I think Texas is kind of shot to it. I'd really like it if I'm them. I think, again, you look at Clemson, I still don't think I'm wildly scared of that team. Now, they do have a defense that if they come to play and they stop Texas' run, you've seen Texas struggle when they don't run the ball well. I do think the front seven for Clemson is very good. But if they get by Clemson, I just don't think the Big 12 football is particularly great in Arizona State.
Yeah.
They're playing good ball for sure. But just talent to talent, they're not really in the world.
Look, that's one of two big takeaways is one, like not really punishing teams for conference championship losses, which I think a lot of people probably like to see to an extent because you want to see teams want to play for conference championships. And like if you were to take SMU out of the playoffs here, you might be dealing with teams opting out of conference championships in the 2025 season. So I kind of appreciate leaving that in. And then Dill, this is probably the other big problem we see with the playoffs is like Texas having, look, Oregon's the best team in the country, number one team in the country. They're going to be opening up neutral site against either Ohio State or Tennessee, two of the most dangerous teams in the country.
That's a war path. That's a really tough path to it.
And that top left hand of that bracket, those are all three. Dill, there was times in the college football season where we're talking about Tennessee being the best team in the country. And there's no doubt in my mind their ceiling is banging with any team in the country. Now, good luck. Dan Lanning.
For Ohio State, for that matter, we were talking about them being the best too. So you just look, that's three teams that when they put their best foot forward, have an argument to being the best team in the country for sure.
Yeah, and then you look at Texas and Penn State, and although not conference champions, like that, those are favorable pathways to get to the semifinals of the college football playoffs, right? Now, I think that Texas-Clemson game is really interesting because how we talk about Clemson is I think they got a ceiling that can bang in the college football playoffs. Have we seen that ceiling all year in 2024? No. They've, like, an early preview of that game, they're struggling to run the football, especially the last couple of weeks. Phil Moffitt does not look right. He looks banged up. And as they've struggled to run the football, yes, Cade Klubnik has played well at times, but that's a different kind of pass rush for Texas. If you find yourself in those third and longs against this Texas defense with how good this Texas secondary has been, which has been one of the better units in the country, that is a very tricky game for Clemson. You're looking at one of the best teams in the country. Dill, the best game, at least in my opinion, my humble opinion, what's the most exciting game we see in the first round? It's got to be Ohio State, Tennessee, and Columbus.
And that's by far, because I think, again, those two teams you could very much make in. I think both those teams can win it all. I look at it like, I mean, Clemson, I suppose, has a chance. I don't think Arizona State has a particularly great chance. Don't think Boise State or SMU have great chances. And frankly, don't think Indiana have great chances. Everybody else, I think, is kind of in the mix. So those are two teams that I feel like are very squarely in this thing. And that's a fun first round.
Early look is one, weather in Columbus at this time of the year. And hey, I lived in Tennessee for a couple of years of my life. Like it gets cold there, but it's a different level of bite up in the north in terms of playing in the winter. And then secondly, that's some of the better line of scrimmage play you'll see in the country. I mean, you look at Tennessee, they want to run the football. That is a very good front seven for Ohio State. What does Tennessee look like when they can't run for 250 yards? That's probably where, and we're going to dive into these games a little bit later on today.
Besides Georgia to an extent, but even Tennessee ran the ball fine on Georgia, has really stopped that rushing attack. So we'll see if Ohio State can kind of shut it down.
Yeah,
I haven't really seen it yet.
My take is that I think this Ohio State front seven is one of the better units in the country, and so I think that's going to be a heavyweight matchup. Sure. Notre Dame, Indiana is going to be a fun one. In-state rivalry, so to speak, in-state battle, you might say. And Reese Davis said on the broadcast, Kurt Signetti wanted a home game. Well, you got one pretty close to home here, going on the road to play Notre Dame. Early look on that one, Dill. It's just, again, when Indiana bangs up against those different caliber of athletes than some of the games they've seen. You know, when you play a team like Ohio State or when you play a team like Notre Dame, different caliber, strength and size. How does Indiana deal with that? And can they stop this?
If Notre Dame gets that defensive line healthy, if Howard Cross is ready to rock and roll and playing that game, that's how I see that game being a problem, because frankly, they've really struggled with really good defensive linemen against both Michigan and Ohio State. Those are the two units of great defensive line that I think they played.
Yeah, and they want to throw the football, and that's one of the best secondaries you see in the country as
Notre Dame's defense just straight up as complete of a unit, I think, as there is maybe.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the question with Notre Dame in terms of like, all right, how dangerous can they be in the playoffs is if that passing – because, look, they run the football exceptionally well. They have a very, very good defense, probably top 5 defense in the country. That's a good combination of winning a lot of football games, which Notre Dame has. When you start playing some of the best teams in the country, you feel like you need some explosive passing. You need some sort of explosive passing attack to win and run this gauntlet.
But they have a super explosive rushing attack. I think that's maybe what sometimes people forget. Like, I don't see this passing attack for Notre Dame morphing into a Miami Hurricane level passing attack.
Yep.
But they run the ball well, and they don't just pound on you. They can hit big runs, because those two backs they have led by Love are about as good of backs in the country.
And my take on those, they kind of know what Riley Leonard is, and they lean into his strengths. And I give Notre Dame a lot of credit. That's one of those teams that's found their identity of how they want this football team to look, and they're really leaning into it. Now, is that identity going to be good enough to win a national championship? We're about to find out over the next couple of weeks. So
they said Michigan couldn't do it that way. Michigan did it that way.
Agreed. That's a very, very, very good point. Notre Dame kind of some parallels to Michigan last year. I would agree with that. Penn State, SMU, Dill. And you feel like the winner is going to be favored against Boise State. Look, my take on Boise State, Ashton Jeanty changes that team. Can Boise State hang with the big dogs if you can contain a guy like Ashton Jeanty? That's probably the question. I think it's worth mentioning Boise State's one loss was on the road against the Oregon Ducks, and they played them quite tough early in the season. Dill, Penn State's probably one of those teams that I kind of put into that really dangerous category after watching last night. Yes, the Oregon, Dylan Gabriel probably played his best game of the season against Penn State last night, at least in my opinion. That offense and Dylan Gabriel was very, very sharp. It's hard to score, 45 points against this Penn State defense. But, man, that Penn State offense, that's probably the best we've seen Drew play during his time at Penn State. And Coach Koldenicki's revolutionized this offense. I mean, this is an Oregon defense that is very fundamentally sound. They looked lost against all that pre-snap motion and misdirection that Coach Koldenicki and this Penn State offense threw at you. If you get that version of this Penn State offense, this is going to be a team that is extremely difficult to beat. And Dill, quite frankly, I have Penn State as a touchdown favorite at the least against SMU and Boise State. And I think Penn State's got a very clear pathway.
Them in Texas, when you ask me who's got the best pathway, it's debatable between them and
Yeah,
Texas. I think Texas has a bit of a higher ceiling, frankly, as a team.
probably.
But Penn State's got a really nice path to this playoff because, again, I look SMU. I
We
don't
should
think
talk about SMU, Dill, because
they're really, really good, but I still like. Are they in that complete as a team kind of range of some of those real like established programs, if you will?
Penn State's team speed, like that's kind of how SMU's been rolling through 2024. Guys like Abdul Kader, it's a different level of speed and size for that Penn State defense. But I will give SMU a ton of like Kevin Jennings. Kevin Jennings is a dude. And you look at that game last night, I'm not necessarily going to get up here and say SMU was the better team than Clemson, but SMU outgained them by over 100 yards. In that second half, SMU was rolling. And if you play 5 quarters of a football game, SMU probably wins that football game against
Now, I
Clemson.
do like the way Penn State can slow that game down because if they play physically, they did in the offensive line like they did against Oregon, that's going to be a real problem for SMU because if they can keep that game slow and grind them down a little bit like they were doing, I think that's where Clemson couldn't really do that to SMU in the second half. That's when it started to get a little haywire for Clemson. I think Penn State, just given their offense and the completeness and the fact that they have a quarterback now who can make that big play for you, convert a 3rd and long once in a while. I think Penn State's rounding into a team that I think is a very
100%. This I'm taking right now Penn State over SMU, but not enough people talk about that SMU defense. Like, yeah, Kevin Jennings been awesome. They got a ton of different playmakers. That's a top 5 unit against the run in the country. Clemson really couldn't run the football unless it was Cade Klubnik kind of doing it himself.
I know, but the Clemson offensive line and the backs just aren't. They're not the Penn State offense.
100% different. And if you're Penn State, you want to make that a Big Ten football game and not get. That's kind of where Clemson got in trouble last night. Is like in that second half that started kind of into a track meet. A lot of possessions, a lot of plays.
Because when SMU gets their tempo going, they get that first down and they're off. They get really hard to stop.
That's not how Penn State wants to play, And I think Penn State, because of the line of scrimmage play, probably has the ability to control how that game is going to get played. Any other takes? I mean, I'm fired. I think we got a lot of good round 1 matchups, and there's going to be some chaos. And I think a lot of college football fans are excited for.
I think the most unpredictable matchup, frankly, to me, is that Indiana Notre Dame, because I still am not totally. That's probably the one I'm least able to wrap my head around.
Mine's Tennessee, Ohio State. I think that's.
Well, but I know that's going to be a tight one. I think both those teams can win that. I think it's tough. Like, I feel like there's a range of variance in that game where I could see Notre Dame winning pretty handily. I could see Indiana being able to score points and move the ball.
Yeah.
They have been able to do that relatively consistently, aside from only that Ohio State game in the second half of Michigan. And in Notre Dame, really, aside from that game, obviously against Texas A&M, we don't totally know how good they are. I don't think. I think they're really good, but we don't know.
Agreed with that. Very much agreed with that.
Like, I know Tennessee and Ohio State are good. I've seen them play the teams that I know are good, and they've acquitted themselves well. We just don't know as much about Notre Dame.
Agreed. Because it's just they haven't really. Is this the best team that Notre Dame's played all year? It would be Texas A&M, but it probably would be. So that is going to be a fun one too. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section. A lot of different takes to be had. We'll be previewing the games. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.